depends in part on whether that inflation is high or low, and in part on whether that inflation is anticipated, perfectly anticipated, versus whether it comes as a surprise. So let's think about two inflation rates, a 2% per year and a 20% per year. Right? That gives us a high and a low to think about. And let's suppose that we can perfectly anticipate what that inflation rate is. So if we have 2%, that's exactly what we were anticipating. If we were anticipating 20%, that's exactly what we were anticipating. So no surprises at this point. So when we think about the cost associated with 20% inflation versus 2% inflation, we can identify 5 significant costs. Right? And so the first 2 are kind of related to each other. So shoe leather cost and menu cost. What these involve are the kinds of costs that a business or an individual would have to incur to deal with high inflation that they wouldn't necessarily have to incur if inflation were low. Again, even if it's really high and perfectly anticipated versus really low and perfectly anticipated. So let's think about a business. Right? So in your business, it's all cash. Right? So you sell lots of stuff. People come into your store every day and give you lots of currency. And inflation is 20%, which means nominal interest rates are 22, 23%. You know that, right? Inflation's not any different. And at the end of the day, you go, I'm really tired. I'm not going to go to the bank today and put all this cash in. What do you give up by being really tired and not going to the bank? You give up earning whatever the interest rate would be overnight on all that cash. Well, because you don't want to give that up, you might say, maybe I should hire somebody who can manage all this money coming in and getting the money to the bank so we can earn some more money on the money that's coming in. Right? Now, for small business, that's probably not a big thing. They're not going to worry about it too much. Suppose you're Apple. Apple is sitting on about $120 billion. Do they have more people in their corporate treasury department if inflation's 20% and interest rates are 23? Or do they have more people when inflation's 2 and nominal rates are 4? I would argue they'd have a lot more people managing that money when they're sitting there with interest rates in the 20% range. Because if they don't manage it well, it's income that's lost to the company. But notice that those resources that Apple is now using to manage its money because of inflation are not helping to design the next big thing. I can't say that, can I? Next big thing's that other company. Okay. Their next big I thing. Okay. So that's what we mean by shoe leather cost and menu cost. Shoe leather came because when you're managing all that money in the olden days, you had to walk back and forth to the bank and you wore out the leather on your shoes. Menu costs have to do with, suppose you run a restaurant, right? You have all your items there, you have all your prices. Suppose inflation's 2%, exactly what you anticipate. How often do you change your menu and your prices on your menu? Maybe once a year, right? What if inflation's 20%? How often do you change your prices? Maybe once a month, right? But it costs money to change your prices. You got printing costs, you got this, that, and the other thing. So again, it's all about resource utilization. Resources that are used to deal with inflation that has nothing to do with dealing with your business, the products and services that you produce and sell. The third item here, tax distortions. Despite the best efforts of politicians, or maybe because of the less than best effort of politicians, tax codes are rarely indexed to changes in inflation. So let me give you an example. This has already been fixed in the U.S. tax code, but let me give you an example. Suppose that you live in a country with a progressive tax rate. The more money you make, the higher percentage of your income you pay as taxes. And now you have 20% inflation. So prices are going up by 20%, and your income's going up by 20% as well. Notice your real purchasing power has not changed. But as your income goes up, guess what? You get bumped into a higher tax bracket. So even though your purchasing power hasn't changed in this example, your tax bill has gone up. Your real disposable income has gone down. You now need to change your consumption pattern. This is a distortion because of the tax code not being reflective of what's happening to inflation. Notice that if prices are only going up 2% and your salary is only going up 2% per year, you're not going to move into a new tax bracket very quickly. So the tax distortion effects will be much, much smaller. Fourth, when you have low inflation, the volatility inflation is also very low. When you have high inflation, the volatility is much greater. Think about it as the standard deviation around the average or mean inflation rate. Low inflation rates, low standard deviations. High inflation rates, high standard deviations. So if you have an expected anticipated inflation rate of 2%, well, 2% is about 0.17 per month. Right? I'm going to guess that over the last 5 years, the numbers that we've seen on inflation per month have been 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 80% of the time. When we had really high inflation in the United States back in the middle 1970s and early 1980s, inflation rates above 10%, the monthly inflation numbers could be 0.5, 1.5, 0.9 to much, much bigger dispersion. Now remember, bigger dispersions means less certainty because most people are risk averse. They don't like certainty. So they undertake fewer economic activities, especially long-term activities. Now I know all of you are risk takers, and I know that to be the case because you're taking my class. Finally, you have what we call the loss of the dollar yardstick. Okay, what we mean by the dollar yardstick? How many of you have ever heard from your grandparents, when I was your age, a loaf of bread only cost a nickel, a quart of milk only was a dime, a pair of shoes was only $3? Right? I can remember my dad telling me when I was not much older than you, first house I bought in California cost $3,500. I go, yeah, that doesn't compute, right? Just does not compute. So the higher the inflation rate is, the bigger the difference in price levels over time. When that happens, you lose all sorts of information. You can't make comparisons across time. I don't know whether my parents were better off than I was at the same age. I paid a whole lot more than $3,500 for my first house, but my income was much higher as well. So it's hard to know. When we get to unanticipated inflation, again, we have all the costs of anticipated inflation, but now we got much more variability in everything. But the biggest problem, and what polls show is the biggest pushback on inflation, is this thing we call the arbitrary redistribution of income and wealth. Here we're talking about real incomes. So let's think about an example. Let's suppose that you take out a loan. You're going to pay it back in 1 year. And you expect inflation to be 5%, and the nominal interest rate is 7. So real interest rate of 2. You go, that's fine. I'll give away 2 years of purchasing power a year from now to have the money today. But then inflation actually turns out to only be 2%. Are you better off or worse off? Remember, you're still paying 7%. You thought inflation was going to be 5, but it actually turned out to be 2. As the borrower, Are you better off or worse off? You're definitely worse off, right? The purchasing power that you're giving away. You're actually paying a real interest rate of 5%, not 2% that you thought when you took out the loan. So when inflation surprises on the downside, it benefits lenders and harms borrowers. When inflation surprises on the upside, it benefits borrowers and harms lenders. And it's a zero-sum game. How much you lose is exactly how much the other party earns. And notice none of us had anything to do with the surprise in inflation. That's the arbitrary part. I don't mind making a mistake, but when the mistake is made on top of me, I sometimes get upset about that. So that's what we mean by the arbitrary redistribution of income. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about exam number 1. So as you know, we are scheduled to have exam number 1 in class next Tuesday, September 30th, during class time, so that will be 3:40 to 5 o'clock. We must end promptly at 5 o'clock, as there is another class in this room after us. So it's not a matter that I'd like to give you more time. We will end at 5 o'clock. You will need to stop writing at that particular point. The material on the exam will cover chapters 1 through 7, so everything that we've talked about, including today. The format will be 10 multiple choice questions and 2 analytical free response questions. So think of it as 2 problem sets, although probably not quite as involved. The exam itself will be closed book and closed notes. No cheat sheets allowed, right? So you need to know. I once experimented with open book and open notes and cheat sheets, and 75% of students never finished the exam because they were too busy looking things up. So not a good thing. Now, you will get an exam packet that will be completely self-contained. You do not need to bring a blue book. You do not need to bring scratch paper. It will be in the exam packet itself. If you want to look at one of the old exams that's on B courses, you can print out exam 1 from either of the prior 2 semesters. You'll see what the entire exam packet looks like. You will need your set of colored pens and pencils. You will need a yellow highlighter. Not a pink one, not a purple one, not a blue one, not a green one. A yellow highlighter. This is a test to see if you pass nursery school colors. Okay? If you want to use an eraser or white out tape, that's fine. A straight edge, that's fine. Please don't bring any sharp objects. I don't want you to hurt yourself or me. No electronic devices. There will be nothing that requires calculations that you can't do in your head. So no calculators, no phones, no tablets, no laptops. If you want to use an electronic, if you would like to use an electronic translator, that's fine. You need to show it to me before the exam begins. Can we please have it quiet? So you need to show it to me before the exam begins. If you bring it to me, turn it on before you get up here. If it has a slot where you can have a memory card, make sure that that's open and that the memory slot is empty. Okay, time management. Really, really, really important. This is the number 1 complaint about my exams. I didn't have enough time. Okay, you get twice as much time on the final exam, but not on this one. 80 minutes. Time management is incredibly important. Remember, there'll be 3 sections to the exam. Multiple choice, worth 30 points. Analytical question 1, 35 points. Analytical question 2, 35 points. If you think about the exam in 3 sections, 75 minutes divided by 3, by the time we get everything passed out, that's 25 minutes each. You should not be spending 40 or 45 minutes on any one of those sections. There are diminishing marginal returns to continuing to work on a section beyond an appropriate amount of time. Okay? You can first read the questions carefully. I know not everybody agrees, but including sometimes the GSIs or even my wife, I am not trying to trick you. I am trying to challenge you, so you can count on seeing something that you haven't seen before. You can figure it out. Read the question carefully. Take your yellow, not your pink, not your blue, not your green, your yellow highlighter, highlight the exogenous shocks that are happening. Highlight what the important information is. Once you do that, you should be able to figure out what curve does that shift. Make the shifts, figure out what's going on. We are not an English class. You do not have to write nice, long, beautiful prose. You can do bullet points. You can use mnemonics. You don't have to write output per worker. Y over L, we know what it means. We're assuming you know what it means too. Increase, decrease, you can use arrows. Shift to the left or the right, you can use arrows. Right? You will need words, however, to explain what is happening and why it is happening. But think about bullet points. Compress your answers to be as succinct as you possibly can. Also, remember, somebody's got to read what you're writing. Be legible. If they can't read it, they can't give you the points you deserve. We've only had 3 models. So 2 analytical questions, 3 models. Guess what? 2 of these 3 are going to be on the exam. Production functions, saving and investment, solo. Right? So that's what's going to be on this exam. Okay, diagrams are important, but as you probably learned from problem sets, this is also not a class in art. So while the diagrams are important to help explain and to help your thinking along, only about 1/3 of the points are actually on the diagram. Most of the points will be on your explanations. So that's what's important. The economic understanding, what's happening, and especially why is that happening. That's very, very important. So keep that in mind. Your best study guides, old problem sets, old exams, current problem sets that we've done. Look those over. Go talk to your GSIs if you have issues. The GSI, I'll come back. The other important thing, endogenous and exogenous variables. Make sure for each one of the models you know which category they fall into. What are the exogenous variables? What are the endogenous variables? Remember, in your explanation of why something is happening, an exogenous variable causes a shift in a curve, which creates some sort of situation between 2 other variables that causes it to change, and then your endogenous variables change. So you should make a list of all the exogenous variables for each one of these models so that you can quickly understand or identify what is happening. Finally, the GSIs are organizing review sessions. There will be one tomorrow, one on Sunday, one on Monday, all in the evening. You will get an email letting you know the exact time and the exact location. If you go to the review sessions, come with good questions. Don't come with bad questions. Don't come not having studied anything. Don't waste either your time or the other people's time or the GSI's time. Your review sessions will be 2 hours, so that's not a whole bunch of time. So you're going to have to do some work before you show up at review session. So have a wonderful, relaxing weekend. I will see you on Tuesday, and we'll have some fun then.